My name is Wendy Myers. I'm 34 years old and I'm an ICU nurse, the kind of person strangers trust with their worst nights. Last June, I put on my best dress, drove out to my little sister's wedding, walked up to the welcome table, gave my name, and watched the coordinator's face go white. "I'm sorry," she said. "You were removed from the guest list this morning." I looked at my mom, standing 10 feet away in her champagne dress. She smiled. "Why would we invite someone who isn't really family?" I nodded once. "Then today is the last time you'll ever see me as family." And I turned around and left. My mother thought she had erased me. She missed one detail. The name she crossed off that list was printed on a contract she had never bothered to read. By the time the ceremony music started, her phone would not stop ringing, and my sister would be standing in a parking lot in her wedding dress, asking one question nobody could answer. What happened at that wedding, 120 guests will never forget. But for you to feel the weight of it, I have to take you back 12 years. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally get heard and family secrets come home to roost. If you've ever loved someone in silence and paid the price for it, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. 12 years ago, my father died of a stroke at 51, on a Tuesday, in the parking lot of the hardware store he'd worked at for 2 decades. I was 22, one semester from finishing nursing school. My sister Chloe was 15. My mother, Carol, was 49, and within a day of the funeral announcement, our kitchen in Millbrook looked like a casserole convention. The ladies of First Baptist came in shifts. They brought foil pans and soft voices, and they patted my mother's hand like she was made of church glass. Chloe fell asleep on the couch in her black dress 2 nights running. I did the dishes because my hands needed a job. That's a nurse thing, I'd learn later. When you can't fix the big thing, you fix the small ones. On the third night, I carried a stack of sympathy cards in from the mailbox, and 2 women from the flower committee were talking low in the hallway. They didn't hear me stop. "That poor woman," one said. "2 girls, no pension to speak of. She'll lose that house by Easter." I stood there holding other people's condolences and felt the floor of our family tilt. I told myself they were wrong. Church ladies love a tragedy the way gulls love a parking lot. But that night, sorting the mail on the counter, I found an envelope that wasn't a sympathy card. It was from Millbrook Savings, addressed to my father, stamped in red. The mortgage was 2 months behind. Not from the funeral, from before. My dad had been drowning quietly for a while, and he'd been good at quiet. It ran in the family. I put the envelope in my pocket before my mother saw me holding it, and I didn't sleep. 2 nights after the funeral, I came downstairs at 2 in the morning for water and found my mother sitting on the kitchen floor. Not at the table. On the floor. In her bathrobe. With the bills spread around her like fallen leaves. She was crying with no sound at all, one hand pressed over her mouth, the way you cry when you've decided nobody is allowed to hear it. I had never seen my mother be anything but certain. She ran bake sales like a general. She ironed pillowcases. And here she was on the linoleum, 49 years old, holding a mortgage statement like it was a diagnosis. I sat down next to her and put the red stamped envelope from my pocket on the pile, so she'd know she wasn't carrying it alone. For a second her face was just a face, scared, tired, human. Then she grabbed my wrist, hard, and looked at me with something fierce coming back into her eyes. "Chloe cannot know," she said. "Not a word. Not ever. She just lost her father. She is not going to lose the ground she stands on, too." I said I could help. I said in 6 months I'd be a nurse, and nurses get paid, and we could do this together. She squeezed my wrist tighter. "Then help. But hear me, Wendy. Don't tell Chloe. Some help only helps if it's invisible." I was 22. My father was 10 days gone, and my mother was on the floor. Of course I promised. I thought I was making a promise to protect my sister. Really, I was signing away the next 12 years of my life. I just couldn't read the fine print in the dark. I graduated in May, passed my boards in June, and took a night shift ICU position at Riverside Memorial in Columbus, 90 minutes from Millbrook, because nights paid a differential and I needed every dollar of it. By August, the machine was running. Every payday, an automatic transfer left my account and landed in my mother's. She insisted on that part. Money would flow through her. And only her. "Your sister watches everything," she said. "If checks start appearing with your name on them, she'll feel like a charity case. Let me handle the household. That's my job." It sounded almost reasonable. It always did. So the mortgage came current under my mother's name. The furnace got replaced under my mother's name. Chloe's school fees, the leaking roof, the car that got my sister to junior year. All of it wore my mother's name like a borrowed coat. I worked 3 12-hour nights a week, then picked up a fourth. I learned to sleep at noon with a towel over my eyes. I was 23 and tired in a way that felt like virtue. That first Thanksgiving after Dad died, I drove home with a grocery store pie and sat at our old table, and my mother stood up to say grace. She thanked God for carrying us. Then she smiled at the whole table, at Chloe, at my Aunt Renee, and said, "And Tom's life insurance finally came through. We're going to be all right. God provides." There was no life insurance. There was a lapsed policy and a daughter on night shift. I sat there with pie on my fork and watched my own money get baptized under a different name. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit, as long as Chloe kept her ground. That sentence would cost me more than the mortgage ever did. Here's what nobody tells you about invisible help. It doesn't just hide the money, it hides you. Over the next few years, I paid for Chloe's braces, her summer design camp, the deposit on her senior trip. Every bit of it routed through my mother, wearing my mother's name. Meanwhile, night shift did what night shift does. I missed Chloe's spring choir concert because I was holding a stranger's hand while he died at 4 in the morning. I missed her 16th birthday dinner because 2 nurses called out and the unit can't run empty. Each time I called, I apologized, I mailed something. And each time, I found out later, my absence arrived home, before my apology did, wrapped in my mother's version. Wendy couldn't be bothered. Wendy has her own life in the city now. Big city hospital, no time for small-town people. I didn't hear those lines myself, not for years. I just felt the temperature drop. Chloe's texts got shorter, then politer. Which is worse? A 15-year-old who loves you sends you nonsense at midnight. A 17-year-old who's been taught you abandoned her sends you thank you notes. She wore the braces I paid for in every school picture, and by the last one, she wasn't sure she knew me. I told myself it was distance. I told myself teenagers drift, and I'd fix it when things calmed down, and the money was the thing that mattered. But you can't defend yourself against a story you don't know is being told. That's the part I need you to understand before we get to the wedding. I wasn't losing my sister to time. I was losing her to an author. And the author was cooking Sunday dinner in the house I was paying for. By the time I hit 30, my life in Columbus was small and clean, like a recovery room. 1-bedroom apartment, second-hand couch, a fern I kept alive out of professional pride. I dated a physical therapist named Dan for almost 2 years. He left kindly. He said, "You're the most reliable person I've ever met, and none of it is pointed at you." He wasn't wrong. My family was a second shift I clocked into every payday. On the unit, I was good. Better than good. Charge nurses fought over me because I'm calm when it counts, and I catch things early. 12 years of nights teach you to read a monitor the way other people read a face. The little dip before the crash. The rhythm that's technically fine and about to not be. I could spot trouble coming in a stranger's heartbeat from across a dark room. I just never turned that skill on my own life. The monitor was right there. I kept it switched off. My mother visited my apartment exactly twice in all those years. The second time, she walked through it slowly, opening cabinets, and took a picture of my living room on her phone. I thought that was odd. Months later, Aunt Renee let it slip at a funeral reception, the way she always lets things slip. "Your mom worries, honey." She showed us the pictures. She said, "Wendy's barely scraping by up there. She can't help us." I'd never ask her. I remember laughing. One short, ugly laugh. Right there by the funeral potatoes. Barely scraping by. I had sent her 40% of everything I'd earned since I was 23. My little apartment wasn't proof I was struggling. It was the receipt. And she was already teaching the family how to read it wrong. To be fair to my mother, and I've had years to work on being fair, you have to see what Millbrook made of her. In a town that size, a widow is a public figure. And Carol Myers became a great one. She kept the house everyone said she'd lose. She kept Chloe in choir robes and honor rolls. She showed up to First Baptist every Sunday with her hair set and her chin up, and the town wrote the story it wanted. The widow who held it together. Women's groups asked her to speak. Ladies grabbed her hand in the grocery store. Carol, you're so strong. I could never. Strong stopped being a compliment and became her job title. Nobody ever asked what the strength ran on. Nobody in Millbrook ever asks how the lights stay on. They just admire the glow. My grandmother, Carol's mother, was cut from the same cold cloth, and she had a saying I heard at every holiday of my childhood. A woman who needs help is a failure twice, once for needing it, once for showing it. My mother grew up under that sentence. I try to remember she was somebody's daughter too, and that the trap she built for me had been built for her first. But understanding a trap has never once sprung it. Every month, my transfer landed in her account, and every month it came out the other side transformed, into her thrift, her faith, her backbone. The church praised her. Chloe adored her. And I'd sit in my car after a night shift, watching the sun come up over the hospital parking garage, vaguely aware that something was being taken from me that I didn't have a name for yet. I didn't understand what my silence was buying her. Every check bought another chapter of a story I wasn't in. Chloe got into the State University's design program, and I was so proud I cried alone in a supply closet like a normal person. Then I picked up extra shifts, because the aid package covered half, and somebody had to be the other half. Over 4 years, $38,000 moved from my account, through my mother's hands, into a parent portal with my mother's name on the login. Tuition, housing, the good laptop a design major actually needs. When Chloe called home worried about a bill, my mother would tell her, "Calm as pond water. Your father's insurance is handling it. Focus on your classes. That's how you thank us." Us. I used to grip the phone hard when I heard about those conversations from Renee, that small word doing so much invisible lifting. Graduation day, I drove down on no sleep after a Friday night shift. I sat in the last row of the arena, still smelling faintly of hospital soap, and watched my baby sister cross the stage in a gown the color of cream. I clapped until my palms burned. Down front, the family had a whole row. My mother, Renee, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Afterward, on the lawn, Chloe posed for pictures holding a glittered poster board some friend had made for her. It said, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." My mother stood beside her, holding the flowers I had wired money for, glowing like a woman collecting a Lifetime Achievement Award. I got one hug, quick, polite, her eyes already looking past me for the photographer. Then my phone buzzed. The unit, short-staffed again. Could I come in? I said yes. Of course I said yes. I left before the confetti was out of anyone's hair and nobody noticed the last row emptying. People always ask the quiet one, "Why didn't you just say something?" So let me tell you about the time I did. Years before that graduation, when Chloe was a high school senior filling out financial aid forms, she called me, stressed about money. I was tired, and the promise was heavy, and I got as far as, "Chloe, listen, if you ever wonder how the tuition stuff actually works." That's when I heard it. The little change in the room tone. I was on speaker, and my mother had walked in. Chloe said, "Mom's here, say hi." And the conversation went cheerful and died. My mother called me back that night, alone, and her voice was sugar wrapped around a razor. "What exactly were you about to do?" I said. Maybe Chloe was old enough to know where the help came from. There was a long pause, and then my mother said the thing she knew would work. "You want a receipt for love? Is that who I raised? Because I'll tell you what your sister will hear. She'll hear that every good thing in her life was a bill you were keeping track of. It will break her. 3 months before college. Is that what you want to be to her? I want to be clear about the trap. Because it was a good one. She held the only witness. The money moved through her accounts, so the paper agreed with her. And the timing meant blowing it up would land on Chloe, never on Carol. I wasn't a fool who trusted too easily. I was a creditor with no records, up against the bank. So I stopped trying. That was my mistake. The silence. And it was about to cost me the only person I was protecting. After college, Chloe took a design job in Columbus, 20 minutes from my apartment, and for a while I let myself hope proximity would fix what distance had broken. It didn't get the chance. The invitations kept having accidents. Her housewarming. I found out from Facebook, 3 weeks of photos deep, my sister holding a paint roller and laughing next to our mother, who had apparently driven up to help her decorate. When I mentioned it, Mom sighed. Honey, we sent you the details. Things get lost. You're so hard to pin down. Chloe's 25th birthday dinner happened at a restaurant I drive past on my way to work. I heard about it at Christmas from Renee, who leaned in over the ham with her talent for friendly damage. Chloe was hurt, you know. You never even answered the invite. There was no invite. There was never an invite. And here's the efficient part. The part I can almost admire from a clinical distance. My mother kept track of my schedule. She'd call, warm as anything, and ask about my rotation. Just so I can pray over your week, honey. Then family things landed on my working weekends with the precision of scheduled surgery. Every miss got filed in the story. Wendy's too busy. Wendy thinks she's better than us. Wendy forgot where she came from. 3 years of that, brick by brick. And my sister and I became two people who loved each other's memory and couldn't hold a phone call. Estrangement doesn't usually arrive like a door slamming. It arrives like carbon monoxide. Odorless, patient, pumped in by someone who keeps telling you the air is fine. By the time Chloe got engaged, I was almost fully gone from her life. Almost. Now I have to stop the family story for a minute, because 2 Januaries ago, a stranger checked into my unit, and you need to remember him. Massive heart attack, 61 years old, silver hair, big careful hands, bed 9. He came up from the cath lab gray as newsprint, and his wife stood in the doorway all night with her coat still on. I had him for 9 nights. On the third one, around 3 in the morning, his monitor showed me something I didn't like. A little run of nothing much. The kind of rhythm you could chart and walk away from. I didn't walk away. I called the resident, pushed for the labs, had the crash cart outside his door before the alarm ever fired. When it fired, we were ready in seconds. He came back fast. Afterward, awake and embarrassed the way strong men get, he watched me reset his lines and said, "You were standing right there, 3 a.m., and you were just there." I told him that's the shift. He shook his head. No, the night shift is when you find out who stays. He said it like a man filing something away for later. For 6 more nights he called me the one who stays, and introduced me to his wife that way, and I'd wave it off and check his drips. My badge, like every badge at Riverside, shows a first name only, hospital policy, for staff safety. To that family, I was just Wendy, ICU, nights. He went home on a gurney ride I wasn't there for because I was asleep with a towel over my eyes. I heard his family sent a thank you letter addressed to Wendy, the night nurse. Policy again. It was never forwarded. Remember the man in bed 9. 2 years later, he stopped a wedding with one raised hand. I didn't even know his last name yet. Chloe got engaged a year and a half ago. I found out over the family group text, a thread I mostly haunted like a polite ghost. There was a photo of a ring, a flood of exclamation points from cousins, and a name. Eric Calloway, civil engineer, Columbus. In the picture behind the ring, my sister's face was doing something I hadn't seen since she was 15. Pure, unguarded happiness. I typed and deleted a dozen messages, then sent something simple to her directly. Just her. Congratulations, Chloe. He's lucky. Dad would have interrogated him and then loved him. The three dots appeared and disappeared for a long time. Then she sent back a photo of the ring on her hand, close up, with the caption, "I can't stop staring at it." One exclamation point, aimed at me. I know how that sounds, but when you've spent years on rationed warmth, you can taste the difference between courtesy and a crack in the wall. That exclamation point was a crack in the wall. I wrote back offering to help with anything: planning, dress hunting, spreadsheets, blisters. Before Chloe could answer, my mother answered for her, back on the main thread, smooth as icing. "Everything's handled, sweetheart. We've got our little team." And that seemed to be that. I told myself it was fine. I'd be at the wedding. I'd dance with my sister. And a wedding is a door good things walk through. 2 weeks later, my phone rang, and it was my mother, using the voice she saves for asking. Warm, low, a little breathless, the voice from the kitchen floor. "Wendy, honey, there is one thing. One last thing. Then we're square." I should have heard the trap arming itself. Instead, I heard my mother needing me. Here was the situation, as my mother laid it out. Chloe had fallen in love with a venue, the Arbor House, a garden estate just outside Columbus, white chairs under old oaks, the kind of place a design major dreams in. A June Saturday had opened up because of a cancellation, and the venue needed a $7,000 deposit inside 48 hours to hold it. "The insurance money is gone," my mother said, quiet, like a confession. Which was a strange thing to hear about money that had never existed, and told me she'd repeated the story so long she half believed it herself. "I can't swing this." But she cannot know that, Wendy. Not while she's picking out her dress. She'd feel indebted at her own wedding. Let her have this one thing clean. "You already know the melody, sing along. Don't tell Chloe. Some help only helps if it's invisible. But here's the wrinkle fate put in the fabric. A wire that size wouldn't clear from her account in time, and the venue required the cardholder present to sign. My mother, Empress of the Invisible, needed me visible for 1 hour. So on my day off, I drove to the Arbor House and met the coordinator, a sharp, kind woman about 30, named Bree Hartley, who walked me under the oaks and talked timelines. She slid the contract across a white folder. "So you're the big sister," she said, smiling. "Chloe's lucky." I signed everywhere the little flags pointed. Client of record Wendy Myers, card on file ending 4471, day of contact, Carol Myers, listed at my mother's request, "So nobody bothers you at work, honey. $21,000 total, deposit down, installments through spring, final balance due 2 weeks out." I initialed the guest list and changes clause without reading it closely. Who reads that clause? For the first time in 12 years, I put my own name on something. One signature. My mother drove home believing she'd buried the evidence. She'd actually just signed her whole story up for demolition, and neither of us knew it. Before I tell you what my mother did with that signature, let me ask you something, from one quiet one to another. If you've ever paid for a thing your name was kept off of, a house, a tuition, a whole childhood, you already know how this feels. Tell me in the comments, did you stay silent or did you speak? I read every story. And if you're new here, subscribe, because what she did on the wedding morning still takes my breath. The next year ran on 2 parallel tracks, and I only had a ticket for one of them. On track 1, the payments. The deposit cleared, the spring installment cleared, and 14 days before the wedding, card ending 4471 paid the final $9,400 without a hiccup. $21,000, paid in full, time-stamped, filed in a white folder in a coordinator's office. On track 2, the wedding itself, which happened to other people. I wasn't asked to a single tasting, fitting, or planning lunch. The bridal party got announced on social media in matching pajamas, 6 girls holding mimosas, and my absence stood there in the photo like a chalk outline. Renee, reliable as gravity, supplied the official explanation over the phone. "Well, honey, your mom said you told her weddings aren't your thing." Weddings aren't my thing. I sat with that one for a while. I have worked Christmas Eve codes and held phones up to dying ears so families could say goodbye. I don't get to have things that aren't my thing. That sentence had my mother's fingerprints all over it. Just plausible enough. Just cold enough. Impossible to disprove without calling her a liar in public. So Chloe believed I'd waved her wedding away, and I believed I'd been quietly benched. And the author of both beliefs mailed out invitations with my name nowhere on them. Then, 8 weeks before the date, an envelope showed up at my apartment anyway. Heavy paper. Hand-addressed. Inside the invitation, in my sister's quick designer's print, one line. "Are you coming? Please." I mailed this one myself. I read that little sentence more times than I'll admit. The wall my mother spent years building had a crack in it, and my sister's handwriting was coming through it like light. I called her that night. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been waiting, and we talked for 40 minutes. The longest conversation we'd had in probably 6 years. Most of it was beautifully unimportant. The dress, ivory, off the shoulder. Eric's terrible golf. The signature cocktail argument, which she'd won. I lay on my second-hand couch with my eyes closed and just let my sister's voice be in my apartment. Somewhere around the half-hour mark, her tone shifted, the way a monitor shifts, and I sat up before I knew why. "Can I ask you something weird?" she said. "Did you really tell Mom that weddings aren't your thing?" The whole 12 years stood up in my chest at once. I chose each word like I was stepping between wires. "Chloe, there is no version of my life where I would miss yours." Silence on the line, but a working silence. I could hear her thinking, hear her holding two stories up against each other and noticing they didn't match. "Because Mom said," she started, and then her doorbell rang, and the moment fell apart in real time. "That's Mom, actually. Dress stuff. I..." A pause I will wonder about forever. "Wendy, I'm glad you're coming." She hung up before I could answer. I sat there in the dark with the phone warm in my hand, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Dangerous, specific hope. My sister had stopped swallowing the story whole. She was starting to chew. Understand? The question she asked scared my mother more than any bill ever could. An audit of money is survivable. An audit of the story was the end of everything. And my mother has always been able to smell an audit coming. What happened the night before the wedding, I had to piece together afterward, from Bree and Eric and my sister, like reconstructing a crash from the black box. Two things happened, and they detonated together. First, the rehearsal dinner, which I was not invited to. Immediate wedding party only, relayed with regret so smooth it squeaked. Toward the end of it, Eric stood up with a glass of wine and did what grooms do, thanked everybody into a warm blur. Then he said, "And to the sister I haven't met yet." Chloe told me her big sister is basically the reason she got through design school. "Wendy, tomorrow, I'm hugging you first." He meant it kindly. Chloe had been telling him things lately. Quiet things. Halfway guessed things. People clapped. My mother, by every account, clapped too, with a smile Renee described as set like jello. Second thing, 3 days earlier, the Arbor House had emailed its standard final packet. Run sheet, head count, arrival times. Addressed per contract, to the client of record. Copy, to the day of contact. My mother opened her copy, probably barely glanced at a document she considered plumbing, and saw the header. Client of record, Wendy Myers, and the arrival day line under it. Our coordinator will greet the client at check-in for any final adjustments. Put yourself inside her arithmetic for a second. It's almost pitiable. Tomorrow, at the gate, in front of Millbrook and the Callaways and God, a stranger with a clipboard was going to greet the invisible daughter, by name, as the woman who paid for it all. The story could survive my absence. It could not survive my arrival. By sunrise, my name was off the list. I want you to see the morning I had. In the hours while my name was being deleted. I was up at 6, off shift for the whole weekend. I'd arranged that months back, the same week the invitation came. I steamed the wrinkles out of a pale blue dress. I dusted off good shoes. And I wrapped the gift I'd been planning for 8 weeks, since my sister's handwriting came through the crack in the wall. Our father wore a plain steel wristwatch every day of his working life. Nothing fancy. A hardware man's watch, scratched by 2 decades of lumber and ladders. The week of the funeral, while the casseroles multiplied, I'd slipped it off his dresser and kept it. Everything else of his got sorted and boxed and given away by committee, but the watch stayed with me, 12 years, 3 apartments. In April, I'd taken it to a jeweler, cleaned, oiled, new crystal. The old band kept because the wear was the point. I wrapped it in tissue, and on the card I wrote the truest sentence I had. He'd have walked you down the aisle. Something of his should. I put the box on the passenger seat like it was a patient in transport. Half an hour of green June fields, windows cracked. At red lights, I practiced smiling in the rearview mirror, and I coached myself like a rookie. Stay near the edges, compliment the flowers. Don't let mom pick the seat. Just be so pleasant, so easy, so present that the story starving everyone had been fed about me dies of contradiction. That was my whole plan. Show up and be undeniable. I pulled through the stone gates of the Arbor House a little after 5, an hour before the ceremony, and the welcome table already had a line. You already heard this scene at the start. Now live it with me slower. The welcome table sat under a white arbor, guest book open, gift table to the side. Ahead of me, cousins gave names and floated through. Then me. Wendy Myers. The coordinator, Bree, the same sharp, kind Bree from 13 months ago, looked down at her list, and her whole body stopped working. Her eyes went from the page to the white folder in the crook of her arm, back to the page. I watched the color drain out of her professional smile. I'm sorry, she said quietly, like it hurt her mouth. You were removed from the guest list. This morning. The line behind me went silent the way a room does when a tray drops, and there was a fresh line of ink through my name. I could see it upside down. A single stroke. Decisive. Still shining a little. That's when my mother appeared at my elbow. Champagne dress, baby's breath in her hair, moving with the unhurried calm of a woman arriving at her own moment. Renee hovered behind her, studying her shoes. I said, Mom, what is this? And my mother looked at me. 12 years of transfers, of night shifts, of tuition and mortgage and this venue, this actual grass she was standing on. And she smiled the church smile, and she raised her voice just enough to reach the line behind us. Why would we invite someone who isn't really family? There it was. The whole architecture, out loud at last. I felt something in me go very still and very clear, the way I get when a monitor starts screaming. I nodded, once. Then today is the last time you'll ever see me as family. I set my father's watch, wrapped and ribboned, on the gift table with the other boxes. And I walked back across the gravel, spine straight, gravel crunching louder than the string music, and I did not look back. I made it to the car without shaking. Nurses are good at that. The shaking comes later. So does the truth. I drove 20 minutes on Route 33 with my hands at 10 and 2 like a student driver, then pulled onto the shoulder because the road had started swimming. Gravel again, under the tires this time. I sat there with the engine ticking and did what I always do with pain. I triaged it. Airway, breathing, circulation. Technically fine. Everything else, not fine. Schedule it for later. And then I reached for the oldest painkiller I own. I called the unit and asked the charge nurse if she needed hands for the 7 o'clock shift. Tonight. She laughed, then heard my voice and stopped. You're supposed to be at a wedding, Myers. I told her plans had changed. She said she'd see about the census and text me, and I said great, cheerful as a greeting card, and hung up, and sat there in my pale blue dress on the shoulder of a state route, understanding myself with terrible clarity. For 12 years, whenever my family made me feel like nothing, I had gone somewhere I could be useful, because useful was the only kind of loved I knew how to arrange for myself. My mother had spent a decade calling me absent. Look at me, proving her right on schedule. Here's what I want you to notice, though. Sitting on that shoulder, holding the ashes of the word family, I never once thought about the money. I didn't call the venue to cancel a payment. The final balance had cleared 2 weeks ago, and I was glad. My sister would have her white chairs under the oaks whether or not I was allowed to sit in one. Love doesn't stop being love just because somebody crossed it off a list. I pulled back onto the road toward Columbus and an empty Saturday. And back at the Arbor House, a coordinator named Bree Hartley was opening a white folder, and everything my mother had spent 12 years burying started clawing its way up. Everything from here until the phone call, I learned afterward, pieced together from Bree, from Eric, from my sister. And I've checked it enough times to tell it straight. Bree walked back to her office with the folder and a bad feeling doing laps in her stomach. That morning, in the run sheet rush, the mother of the bride had caught her by the arm. "Family emergency," she'd said. "Wendy isn't coming. Take her off the list. Keep the head count clean." Day of contacts adjust guest lists constantly. Bree had drawn the line through the name between checking on chair covers and a late florist. Then the removed name walked up to her table, and it matched the name she'd been carrying on the folder all day. Myers, W. Client, of record. Bree pulled the contract, and there it was in the changes clause the client had initialed 13 months earlier. Modifications affecting the client of record require the client's written authorization. There was no written anything. There was a verbal instruction from a day of contact to strike the paying client from her own event. And then, worse, a public scene at the gate that the client had absorbed and walked away from. That's not awkward. In the events business, that's a liability with a string section. Bree called her office manager, and the office did what offices do. Started calling the day of contact to fix the paperwork before the ceremony. In the garden, family photos were wrapping up. My mother's phone lit for the first time, an unknown local number, and she declined it mid-smile without breaking pose. It lit again. She declined it again. Some alarms you can silence. This one had a folder. The third decline is the one that changed the day, because by then Bree had stopped waiting on phones and gone looking on foot. And Eric caught her crossing the courtyard with the folder and a face that didn't belong at a wedding. Grooms an hour from vows notice faces. He stepped into her path. "Is something wrong with the venue?" Bree is careful. She's told me since that she rehearsed a bland sentence and couldn't make herself say it. What she said instead was the truth with its badge showing. "There's a contract issue I need resolved before we start. The guest your family turned away this morning is the client of record on this event." Eric said, approximately, "What?" "She signed the contract. Her card paid for it. Deposit to final balance. I legally can't remove her from her own event on a verbal instruction, and someone did." Eric stood there doing engineering math with the load-bearing facts of his life. He'd been told gently by his future mother-in-law that Chloe's sister had drifted away from the family, that they'd invited her out of grace, and hoped for the best. He had watched that grace at the gate an hour ago from across the garden, not close enough to hear, close enough to see a woman in pale blue walk away, with her spine very straight. "What's her name?" he asked. "The client." Bree turned the folder around. "Wendy Myers." A voice behind them said, "Wendy?" Eric's father had come looking for his son, the way fathers drift toward trouble at weddings. He was staring at the folder. "Wendy, ICU?" And this is where my two stories, the family one and the hospital one, finally recognized each other in a hallway. Because Eric's father, Harold Calloway, 63, retired print shop owner, silver hair, big careful hands, is the man from bed 9. 2 Januaries ago, Riverside Memorial, massive heart attack, 9 nights in my unit, a wife in the doorway with her coat on. The man whose monitor whispered to me at 3 in the morning, whose crash cart was already outside the door, who told me the night shift is when you find out who stays. The thank you letter his family mailed to Wendy, the night nurse, returned. Policy. Undeliverable. He'd told Eric back then, from the hospital bed, with the drama of a man freshly alive. "Find me that nurse someday, son. I owe her a debt this family can't bury." And when Eric started dating a designer named Chloe Myers, and mentioned once that her estranged sister was an ICU nurse somewhere in Columbus, Harold never connected her to anything, because the sister came pre-explained. Cold. Distant. Abandoned the family. You don't go looking for your angel inside somebody else's cautionary tale. He told me later that the name had snagged on him at the rehearsal dinner, just for a second, and he'd let it go. Wendy is a common enough name, and the math of it felt impossible. Now he stood in a courtyard holding 3 facts that would not sit down. Wendy, ICU nurse. The woman they turned away at the gate, who had, it said so right on the folder, quietly paid for the garden he was standing in. Harold told me all this later at the reception, with his hand flat on the table like he was swearing on it. I've bought a lot of paper in my life, he said. I know watermarks. And I know when a story's been printed over something. He straightened his jacket, and he walked toward the ceremony lawn, where the string trio was starting the processional music, and he said, to nobody in particular, hold the ceremony. Here is the scene my mother had built her whole life to sit in, and the scene it turned into. 120 guests on white chairs under the oaks, string trio playing the prelude. My mother, front row, mother of the bride, champagne dress, hands folded. The widow who held it together, arriving at her coronation. And then the processional music simply didn't start. The trio reached the end of the prelude and, on a signal from the back, looped it. Then looped it again. 120 people can feel a delay in their spines. Heads began to turn. And in the front row, inside a little beaded clutch, my mother's phone began to ring, and this time it did not stop. The venue office, retrying. Renee, from 6 rows back, texting in all capitals. Then Eric's name on the screen. A name that had never once needed to call her. Because the groom had stepped away from the arch, which grooms do not do. Buzz. Pause. Buzz. The clutch shivered against her knee like something alive. Women on both sides gave her the sideways church glance. She took the phone out to silence it, and the screen kept lighting through her hand, glowing up between her fingers. An alarm going off in the one room where she had no way to answer it. Bree appeared at the end of the aisle, calm as a funeral director, and bent to her ear. Ma'am, I need you in the office, please. Both families are being gathered. My mother rose, smiling for the crowd, smoothing her dress. And in the office, on the desk, face up where everyone could see it, sat the white folder. My sister looked at it, then at our mother. Whose name is on the contract, Mom? I wasn't in that office. I was 20 miles away in a diner, deciding whether a hospital shift could stand in for a family. But my sister was in that room, in her wedding dress, asking one question and not backing off it. If anyone ever fought for you like that, you remember it forever. Stay with me, because what Chloe did next is the reason I can tell this story at all. And if you believe sisters deserve the truth, take 1 second and hit subscribe. My mother is not an amateur, and even cornered, she opened with her best material. I was protecting you, she told Chloe, voice trembling on cue. Your sister and money are complicated. I didn't want this touching your day. But Chloe had spent months collecting splinters, and now she pulled them out one at a time. The tuition that was always Dad's insurance. Then why had she once found, deep in the junk drawer, a past due notice from Millbrook Savings dated months after Dad died, when the insurance was supposedly covering everything? The famous line, Wendy said. Weddings aren't her thing. Then why, when Chloe mailed an invitation herself, had the RSVP come back within the hour? Yes. Thrilled? All caps. You told me she never came to anything, Chloe said. Who kept her schedule, Mom? Who always knew her shifts? And piece by piece, in front of the Callaways, the story that had run our family for 12 years stopped making its payments. I'm told there was one moment, when my mother was fully human in that room. Her hands went to her mouth, the same way they had on the kitchen floor, and she said, so quietly they almost missed it. My mother buried 2 babies and never wore anything but lipstick to church. A woman who needs help is a failure. That is what I was given. For a breath, even Chloe wavered. Then Carol did what Carol does. Reached for the wheel. Everything I did for this family. You have 120 guests waiting, sweetheart. We are not doing this today. And my sister, in full white, lifted her chin in a way that I'm told looked exactly like me on night shift. Then you won't mind if my sister hears you say it. Because I'm not getting married without her. Wedding dresses don't have pockets. Chloe's phone was back in the bridal suite, in a tote bag, dead anyway. Brides' phones are always dead. So my sister walked out of that office, hiked her skirt in both fists, and cut straight across the corner of the parking lot toward the main house, a bride in full white striding past parked cars while arriving vendors froze mid-unload, and asked Bree for a phone. Bree handed her the office landline like she'd been waiting all day to do one purely good thing. Meanwhile, 20 miles north, I was in a vinyl booth at the Blue Line Diner near the hospital, still in the pale blue dress, staring at a cup of coffee I'd ordered as rent for the seat. The charge nurse had texted, "Census looks okay, but call at 7 if you still want in. 40 minutes to decide." Across the street, the hospital sat there being simple. Clean scrubs, clear tasks, monitors that tell the truth. Nobody in that whole building had ever crossed my name off anything. My phone lit up on the tabletop. A local number I half knew, the venue's exchange. I'd seen it on billing confirmations for a year. My thumb hovered while I did the math on what fresh paperwork today could possibly want from me. That's the only reason I answered. Business voice, the one I use for insurance companies. "This is Wendy." And my little sister's voice came down the line, raw and close, with string music looping somewhere behind her. "Wendy, it's me. Don't hang up." I looked out the window at the hospital, at the easy, useful, unloving Saturday I had all planned. "Chloe, aren't you supposed to be getting married right now?" "Yes," she said. "That's exactly the problem. Everyone's waiting. And I just found out whose name is on this wedding." "Is it true?" she asked. No preamble, no cushions. "The venue. My tuition. The house, Wendy. Is it true? And do you know what I did, with the truth finally standing at the door in its coat?" I reached for the old reflex. One more time. "Chloe, it doesn't matter today. Today is about you and Eric. Go get married. We can talk after the honeymoon." "Stop." Her voice cracked down the middle. "Stop protecting everyone. That's how she won? Don't you get that? Every time you went quiet to keep the peace belonged to her." The diner noise went far away. 12 years, 3 apartments, a couple thousand night shifts. A little envelope stamped in red, a promise extracted on a kitchen floor at 2 in the morning. Some help only helps if it's invisible. I had believed that sentence like scripture, and it had cost me the exact person it was supposed to save. My sister asked a third time, slow, spaces between the syllables. "Wendy, is it true?" "Yes. That's all." The truest word I own, and it was the first time in 12 years I'd said it out loud to the one person it belonged to. I heard my sister start to cry on a borrowed office phone on her wedding day, and it wasn't the delicate kind. Then she pulled in a breath, and when she spoke again she was 15 and 27 at once. "Then come back. Please. I need you to do something for me." Out the window the hospital sat waiting. Simple as ever. Going back meant walking through the gate that had watched me get erased. It also meant breaking the only vow I had left. I want to be honest about the next 10 minutes, because they were the hardest of this whole story. Harder than the gate. Nobody was watching me. That's the thing about real choices. They happen in diners. Alone. With coffee going cold. On one side of the street, the hospital. 7 o'clock shift. Useful hands. The version of love I knew how to do with my eyes closed. The version that had never once asked me to be a whole person, only a competent one. On the other side, 20 miles of road back to a place where my mother's sentence was still hanging in the air over the gift table. I'd made a vow in front of witnesses. "The last time you'll ever see me as family. Where I come from, you keep your word." It's half of what I had left. And here's the ugly little truth I can admit now. Staying gone would have felt strong. Clean. 60 years of quiet Saturdays. My dignity folded neatly. Everyone finally sorry. I sat there wanting it. The way you want a drink or a slammed door. But two things sat in the booth with me. My sister's voice, cracked open, saying that's how she won. And a sentence in my own handwriting, writing a gift table 20 miles south. He'd have walked you down the aisle. Something of his should. I'd written that about a watch. I read it now like a diagnosis. Silence was the family disease. Dad drowned in it, Mom weaponized it. I called it love and took it in both arms. Somebody in the Myers family was going to have to be the one who stays, out loud, in daylight, where it costs. I put $5 under the coffee cup. I texted the charge nurse. Covered your census question. I'm out, family thing. Then I sat behind the wheel, hands at 10 and 2, and set it to the windshield like a care plan. You're not going back for her. You're going back for Chloe. And you're allowed to come back changed. The drive took 19 minutes. The prelude, I'm told, was on its 11th loop. My mother's phone had finally gone silent, face down in her clutch, because everyone who mattered had stopped calling her and started waiting for me. The stone gates of the Arbor House, second time that day. My legs remembered the gravel. At the welcome table, Bree stood alone, and when she saw me, she didn't say a word about lists. She turned the clipboard around so I could see it. Under the line of fresh ink where my name had been struck out, she had rewritten it by hand, big, block letters, underlined. Ms. Myers, she said, you're on the list. I made sure of it myself. I have been thanked by families at 4 in the morning in every way there is, and I still had to look at the oak trees for a second before I could answer her. Inside the office, they were all standing. Eric with his jaw set. A warm-faced woman I'd learn was his mother, Pam, my mother in her champagne dress gone gray in the face, Renee by the wall, and a big silver-haired man who turned around and stopped and pressed his hand flat to his chest like he was checking his own sutures. Bed 9, I said, because I'm a professional. Wendy, said Harold Calloway, the one who stays. He crossed the room and took both my hands, and then his voice went hard, and he turned toward the garden where 120 guests sat wondering. These people were told this woman isn't family. I say we go out there and tell them who paid for every chair they're sitting on. Every chair, every flower, every year. They should know exactly who they turned away at that gate. And my mother closed her eyes, waiting for it. You could see her whole body brace for the machine she'd built to finally run over her in public. It would have been so easy. It would have tasted so good. For about an hour. No, I said. Everyone looked at me. I kept my voice at 3 a.m. level, the one that works. You'd be turning my love into a receipt, Harold, reading it out like a bill she owes. That's her weapon. It was never mine. I looked at my mother, still braced, eyes still shut. The truth is coming. All of it. But it goes person to person, on its feet. Today isn't a courtroom. Today belongs to Chloe. Behind me, the door opened, and my sister stood in it, in full white, holding something small and steel in both hands. Our father's watch, lifted from the gift table, tissue paper still clinging. You gave me something of his, she said. Now I'm asking for something of yours. Walk me down the aisle. She said it plainly, the way you ask for something you've already decided. The room went so quiet I could hear the prelude looping out in the garden. That walk belonged, by every plan and program, to our mother. It had been the widow's last scene, her flowers, her aisle, her town watching. My mother made a small sound, half a syllable of protest, and then looked at her younger daughter's face and understood that the vote had been taken. Chloe turned to her and spoke gently, which somehow made it worse and better at once. You'll be in the front row, Mom. That's where you'll be. Then my sister went to fix her mascara because there was, after all, a wedding. And for a moment my mother and I stood alone by the office window, closer than we'd been since a kitchen floor 12 years ago. 12 seconds, maybe. She looked old for the first time in my memory, and when she spoke, her voice had nothing in it. No sugar, no razor, just a person. I didn't know how to be saved by my own child, she said. There it is, I said. The first true thing you've said in years. She flinched like I'd raised my hand. I hadn't. I used the voice I use for hard news at 3 in the morning, the kind you deliver kindly and completely. Here's what happens now, Mom. You're going to tell her everything. Every dollar, every invitation, every shift you scheduled around. All of it. From you. Before Christmas. Or I will. Once. Plainly. And never again. That's the whole boundary. There's no punishment in it. Just no more editing. She didn't answer. She nodded. Barely. Eyes on the window. And I have learned to let a nod be enough for one day. There was no hug. Anyone who tells you healing starts with a hug has never watched a wound actually close. It starts with debridement. And that part had just happened. Out in the garden, on some signal, the music changed. Bree put her head in the door. Ms. Myers, whenever you're ready. Chloe reappeared, bouquet in hand. And tied to its stems with white ribbon, face out, was a scratched steel watch, keeping perfect time. The doors to the garden opened, and my sister took my arm, and we stood at the top of an aisle I'd been thrown out of 4 hours earlier. 120 faces turned. I was still in the pale blue dress I'd ironed at 6 that morning for a wedding I wasn't allowed into, and every guest in those chairs had heard, one way or another, that the bride's sister wasn't really family. Nobody announced a correction. No one read a statement. There was just this. A bride, gripping the arm of a woman with tired hands and good posture, walking down the grass between the white chairs. Slow, like they had all the time that had ever been lost. I heard the whispers start, and I let them. Let the town do what towns do. I was done applying for my own life. Halfway down we passed the front row, and my mother looked up at me. Her clutch sat in her lap, and the phone inside it was dark and silent. Finally, the first quiet thing about her I'd seen all day. Her face was wet and bare, the church smile nowhere on it, and what was there instead looked almost like the woman on the kitchen floor, the one I'd promised everything to, back when I thought love and silence were the same word. I'd told her she would never see me as family again. Standing in that aisle, I kept the vow the only way a vow like that deserves to be kept. She would never see me as her version of family again. The invisible kind, the crossed-out kind, the kind that pays and vanishes. Family isn't a list you can strike a name from. It's who shows up. It's who stays. It's who walks you the last 30 feet to your whole new life. I lifted my sister's veil at the arch and kissed her cheek, and gave her hand to a good man whose father owes me a debt no one can bury. Then Harold Calloway stood up out of the front row across the aisle and gestured me into his own seat, and said, in a voice that did not whisper, "Front row is for family." I sat. The music settled. And my little sister got married that June evening. An hour behind schedule, under the oaks, on grass that love had paid for, invisibly, no longer. The reception, I'll keep short, because the best parts were small. Harold kept his word. No speeches about money, no receipts read into microphones. But during dinner he came and sat beside me and laid an envelope next to my plate. Soft, creased, 2 years old, addressed in his wife's careful hand to Wendy, the night nurse, ICU, Riverside Memorial. Return to sender, the stamp said. It finally found the right address, he said, and patted the table twice, and left me alone with it, which was the kindest possible thing. I read it in the parking lot later, in my car, and I'm not going to tell you what it said. Some letters you keep for yourself. My sister and I danced to a song from her childhood that she didn't know I'd picked out with the DJ, and she laughed against my shoulder, and for 3 minutes the last 12 years were just weather that had passed through. Before Eric spun her away, we made a deal. Simple as a handshake. Sunday nights, 7 o'clock, phones on, no agenda. We have not missed one since. My mother left the reception early, which the town read as a mother overcome by emotion, and which I read as a woman going home to sit with the bill. The story she'd built still stands in Millbrook mostly. The church ladies still call her strong. A few still murmur about the odd delay at the ceremony. Let them. Stories were never the thing. People are. And in December, before Christmas, she beat the deadline by 9 days, which is the most Carol Myers detail in this entire account. A thick envelope arrived at Chloe's house, handwritten, pages and pages, every dollar, every diverted invitation, the truth about the insurance, the mortgage, the tuition, the venue. A copy came to my apartment 2 days later with a single line added at the bottom, and this one I will tell you. You were never invisible. I just couldn't afford for anyone to see you. It isn't an apology, quite. It's an X-ray, and I'm a professional. I know how much it costs some people to stand still long enough to be seen through. I haven't been back inside my mother's house yet. But when she calls now, on ordinary evenings, about ordinary things, I answer. Some bridges you rebuild one true sentence at a time, and we are, sentence by sentence, two women who no longer lie to each other. That's not a fairy tale. It's better. It's load-bearing. Last month, Chloe mailed me a framed photo from the wedding. It's not the aisle, and it's not the arch. It's the gift table, early morning, before any of it happened. Some stranger's snapshot that caught a small wrapped box with a ribbon, sitting there patient as a heartbeat. On the back, in designer's print, my sister wrote, "It was always on the list." It hangs by my door, next to my badge, and I touch the frame some nights on my way to the shift where strangers trust me with their worst hours. The man in bed 9 was right. All those Januaries ago. The night shift is when you find out who stays. So does a wedding. So, eventually, does a family. If you carry one thing out of my story, carry this. Silence can feel like love, but love kept silent gets rewritten as absence by whoever's holding the pen. So say the true thing, plainly, without a weapon in it, while the people you love can still hear you. That's my story. One crossed-out name. One signature they never read. One walk down an aisle I wasn't allowed into. If this reminded you of a sacrifice nobody ever named, yours or someone else's, say their name in the comments today. Share this with the quiet one in your family, they'll know why. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.